They've already built the altar. The priestly garments are ready. The symbolic Ark of the Covenant has been reconstructed, and hidden deep within Jerusalem, blueprints for the third temple have been finalized. This isn't a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. It's a plan already in motion. Yet, you won't see this on the news. The mainstream media remains eerily silent. Why? Who's behind this global blackout? And more importantly, who's funding the return of the most controversial structure in human history? While the world is distracted by wars, elections, and economic chaos, powerful forces are quietly preparing the stage for one of the most explosive events in biblical prophecy. Private institutions, underground alliances, and wealthy donors are moving in silence, laying every stone, training every priest, reviving every ritual. What's really happening behind the scenes in Israel? And why is this temple, a relic of ancient times, suddenly the center of global interest? This is more than architecture. This is a countdown, a trigger that could shift the balance of power, ignite religious conflict, and fulfill the final chapters of ancient scripture. Stay focused, because what you're about to see has been hidden for a reason. They don't want you to know this, and yet the truth is hiding in plain sight. Right now, while you're watching this video, architectural plans for the third temple are not only drafted, they're completed. Every measurement, every material, every ritual tool has been meticulously detailed. Not for speculation, not for display, but for construction. Real, tangible construction. And here's where it gets disturbing. This isn't some fringe project backed by religious zealots on the outskirts of society. No, this is methodical. This is institutional. There are trained priests already rehearsing rituals. Sacred objects have been recreated down to the smallest biblical specifications. And yes, there's even an altar that's already been built and tested, not in some hidden underground vault, but right in the open, in Jerusalem, during a public ceremony that somehow never made headlines. Now pause for a second and ask yourself, why? Why would something of this magnitude, something with seismic implications for Jews, Christians, Muslims, and global politics, be conveniently left out of your daily newsfeed? You hear about celebrities' divorces, the latest tech gadgets, and political gossip 24/7. But a fully developed plan to resurrect the most controversial religious structure on earth? Silence. Absolute silence. This isn't a coincidence. There's a reason you haven't heard about it. Because once you understand what's really happening, once you grasp the scale, the preparation, and the intent, you begin to see how this one building could become the epicenter of global unrest, or worse, the spark that ignites prophecy. The idea of a third temple is not new. It's ancient, prophetic. It's been spoken of for thousands of years. But the difference now? For the first time in modern history, all the pieces are in place. Every single one. The Temple Institute in Israel has spent decades preparing. They've reconstructed every item described in Exodus and Leviticus. Golden menorahs, silver trumpets, incense altars, and yes, even the garments of the high priest, adorned with 12 precious stones, just like the scriptures commanded. But here's the part that keeps getting swept under the rug. These aren't museum exhibits. They're not for show. They're operational, functional, ready to be used. And the deeper you look, the more you realize. This isn't just about religious tradition. This is political. This is strategic. This is prophetic chess being played on a global board. Because the moment construction begins, or even the official announcement of it, geopolitical tensions in the Middle East will explode. Muslim nations, who view the Temple Mount as sacred Islamic ground, won't stand by quietly. The entire region could be thrown into chaos. So why build it? Why risk that level of conflict? Because for those behind the project, the reward outweighs the risk. To them, rebuilding the temple isn't just an act of devotion. It's a divine assignment, one that signals the final stages of a prophetic timeline. And they're not waiting for permission. They believe they already have it from God Himself. And if you're thinking this is all too far-fetched, think again. In 2018, a fully functional altar was publicly assembled and tested. Priests, trained in accordance with Levitical standards, performed rituals as if the temple already stood. And the reaction? Nothing. Barely a blip in the media. And yet that test marked a pivotal shift. It proved that not only are the plans real, they are being executed step by calculated step. Still with me? Good. Because what comes next is where things get even more unsettling. This isn't just a religious effort, it's being quietly supported by financial and political powers with global reach. Billionaires, organizations, and even foreign governments have been linked to donations, support, and logistical aid. We'll dive into that in just a moment. But for now, understand this. The temple is not some abstract idea waiting for the distant future. It's a concrete, strategic objective that is quietly moving forward while the rest of the world looks the other way. And that silence? That global lack of coverage? It's not accidental. Because once the public connects the dots, once people realize that a biblical prophecy is on the verge of physical fulfillment, the narrative can no longer be controlled. The questions start flooding in. Who's funding this? Why now? What's the real agenda? And what happens the moment the foundation stone is laid? That's exactly where we're going next. Because this mystery runs deeper than you think, and the silence surrounding it. That's your biggest clue that something massive is coming. It's just a building, right? Just stone, metal, wood. A physical structure that once stood, was destroyed, and might one day be rebuilt. That's how most people think about the temple in Jerusalem. A monument of the past, a relic, something symbolic. But that assumption is dead wrong. Because the temple is not just about architecture, it's about power. It's about prophecy. And for millions across the globe, it's about the final countdown to the end of this age. The temple isn't just a place, it's the trigger. To truly understand the weight of what's being planned, you need to realize what the temple is, not was, is. In biblical history, the temple was the physical center of worship, sacrifice, and divine presence, the place where heaven touched earth. But more than that, it was the core of identity for an entire nation. Every feast, every sacrifice, every law centered around it. And now, after 2,000 years of absence, the push to restore it isn't just about religion, it's about reawakening something ancient, something the modern world isn't prepared for. Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Rebuilding the temple will change everything, not in theory, in practice. It's a direct challenge to the status quo, religiously, politically, and spiritually. Once it rises, nothing stays the same. The temple represents the return of a system that hasn't operated since the days of Christ. Sacrifices, priesthood, a central altar, and with it comes a chain reaction of biblical proportions. You can't reintroduce the temple without shaking the foundations of every major religious and political alliance in the region and beyond. And here's the part that hits the hardest. It's not just Jews who are watching. Evangelical Christians believe the Third Temple is essential to usher in the end times. In Islamic eschatology, dramatic changes on the Temple Mount signal their own version of the apocalypse. Every major prophecy stream across faiths meets at this one location. That's not coincidence, that's convergence. And that's why this movement is gathering so much momentum behind the scenes, because those who understand the prophecies know this is the sign. Now pause. Let this sink in. The temple isn't just another religious structure. It's not comparable to a church or a mosque. It's not about sermons and services. It's about blood, fire, incense. It's about ancient rituals rooted in Levitical law, rituals that haven't been publicly practiced in millennia. Rebuilding the temple is a declaration, a bold, unapologetic message to the world that we're returning to the original blueprint. And when that happens, the ripple effects won't be symbolic. They'll be real, tangible, global. Think about the mechanics. A rebuilt temple requires a functioning priesthood, and not just any priesthood, one that can trace its lineage back to Aaron. That process has already started. Priests are being identified, trained, and prepared. Rituals are being practiced, items are being sanctified, and all of this, every step, aligns with exact biblical instruction. Nothing is improvised, it's all intentional. Every object, every movement, every ceremony is drawn directly from Scripture. But there's more, much more. Once the temple exists, it becomes the most contested piece of land on earth, because it doesn't rise in a vacuum. It rises in a place already charged with decades of tension. The Temple Mount isn't just sacred to Jews, it's also the third holiest site in Islam, which means that the moment a temple reconstruction begins, political shockwaves will erupt across the Islamic world. Protests, threats, possibly war. That's not speculation, that's a guarantee. And yet, the preparations continue, quietly, systematically, unshaken. Because for those who are driving this vision forward, the risks don't outweigh the mission. In their eyes, peace is not the goal, fulfillment is. They believe the prophecies demand this, that before the return of the Messiah, or the rise of the Antichrist, depending on which prophecy you read, the temple must stand again, and they won't stop until it does. What makes this more than theory is the timeline. We're not talking about ideas for a distant generation. We're talking about physical readiness, actual tools, actual blueprints, actual rehearsals. You can go online and find images of these sacred objects, priestly garments, silver trumpets, golden menorahs, all made according to ancient texts, all ready to go. So now ask yourself this: when all the pieces are ready, when the land is contested, and when global religions are watching, what's stopping them from making the move? That's what makes this moment so volatile. We are sitting on a powder keg. The temple, once rebuilt, becomes the center of global attention overnight. Because what it symbolizes goes far beyond its physical form. It signals a shift, a turning point. It says to the world, prophecy is no longer words on a page. It's happening now. And that's where this story takes a sharp turn. Because what's coming next is not just about sacred ground or ancient rituals. It's about the people funding this, the alliances forming in the shadows, and the silence of the world's most powerful institutions. There's a reason they're keeping quiet. And once we follow the money, you'll see just how deep this goes. There's something about a sealed blueprint that demands attention, not because it's hidden, but because of what it quietly confirms. The decision has already been made. That's exactly what's happening right now in Israel. This isn't a plan waiting for approval. This isn't theoretical. The architectural designs for the Third Temple are done, finalized, signed off, complete with materials listed, sacred measurements, and step-by-step execution orders. We're not speculating about a someday. We are staring straight at a ready-to-build reality, and almost no one is talking about it. If you were expecting rumors or vague outlines scribbled on napkins, think again. These are professional, state-of-the-art architectural drafts created by seasoned experts. Full-scale designs that include everything: the Holy of Holies, the inner court, the outer court, priest chambers, ritual baths, even blueprints for security systems and visitor pathways. The level of detail is staggering. And it tells us one thing: this is no symbolic gesture. They're building for function, for use, for sacred operations that follow a precise biblical order. Nothing is random. Every centimeter, every angle, every material is grounded in scripture and tradition. This is not an experiment. It's an execution of an ancient plan, with modern tools and real-world consequences. Now think about what that means. While the global spotlight is fixated on politics, economics, and war, this operation is happening in the shadows. But it's not because it's illegal. It's because it's inconvenient to governments, to religious leaders, and to a media system that knows how explosive this revelation really is. Because the moment this plan goes public, it can no longer be ignored. The prophetic timeline shifts from future to present, and the implications, they're massive. Because these blueprints don't exist in isolation. They're connected to physical items that have already been made. The altar, already constructed and used in ceremonial rehearsals. The menorah, molded in pure gold, waiting. The table of showbread, the incense altar, the priestly garments, the ephod, the breastplate. Everything described in the Torah is no longer a mystery. It's been rebuilt, one item at a time, by artisans who believe they are laying the foundation for the return of divine worship on earth. But what happens when you connect the dots? Blueprints that match biblical dimensions, sacred objects restored with exact precision, a priesthood in training, and funding that's flowing, quietly but consistently, from all corners of the globe. The logical next step becomes obvious. All that's left is the green light, the political permission. And that's why this moment in history is so critical, because permission can change in an instant. One shift in leadership, one regional crisis, one global event. That's all it takes for the dream to move from planning to pouring concrete. And this isn't just about Israel. Once the temple rises, it will immediately capture the attention of the entire world. Every faith tradition that holds Jerusalem sacred, Jews, Christians, Muslims, will be forced to respond. You think conflict over land is heated now? Wait until a new altar is erected on ground that millions believe belongs to them. The temple won't just be a building, it will be a declaration. One that changes alliances, inflames enemies, and activates prophecy. But still, the silence continues. Mainstream news outlets rarely mention it. Politicians avoid it. Religious leaders tread carefully. Why? Because the consequences are far too volatile. Once this information becomes widespread, you can't put it back in the bottle. People will start asking the hard questions. Who's behind this? Who approved it? Why are sacred rituals being restored in secret? And most importantly, what does it mean for the rest of us? Because this isn't like building a new synagogue or renovating an old church. This is different. The temple has always been different. From the moment Solomon built the first one, it stood as the most sacred, most powerful, most dangerous place on earth. Not because of its size, but because of what it represented, the direct presence of God dwelling among men. That idea, resurrected in today's geopolitical landscape, isn't just provocative, it's explosive. And yet the plans are real, tangible, verified. You don't have to believe in prophecy to understand the impact. Any world leader, any military strategist, any economist worth their salt knows this is a game changer. It disrupts the balance of power. It introduces unpredictable variables. It mobilizes massive populations who see prophecy not as metaphor, but as destiny. And so, while the media remains quiet, those with eyes wide open are watching the signs, following the developments, reading the reports that quietly leak from insiders and independent journalists. Because if the blueprints are ready, and the objects are ready, and the people are ready, then the only question left is when. But here's what should keep you up at night. The Temple Institute isn't hiding their work. Not really. You can go to their website, you can see the objects, you can read their mission. They're not ashamed of what they're doing. They're just counting on the fact that no one's paying attention, that most people are too distracted, too skeptical, too overwhelmed with daily life to connect the dots. And they might be right, because it's easier to ignore the uncomfortable, to pretend this isn't happening, to treat prophecy as fantasy and blueprints as empty symbols. But that luxury is running out, because the paper is ready, the tools are sharpened, the workers are in place, and when construction starts, the world changes, permanently. And that brings us to the next layer of this story, because buildings don't rise without backing. And this project, it has powerful, wealthy, highly connected backers, many of whom remain in the shadows. The question is, who are they? Why are they investing so heavily in a temple that hasn't existed for 2,000 years? And what do they know that the rest of us don't? That's what we're uncovering next, and what we've found might shock you. Hidden in plain sight, nestled within the old city of Jerusalem, there exists an organization that's been working relentlessly, methodically, and with unwavering purpose for over 3 decades. It's called the Temple Institute, and if you've never heard of it, that's not by accident. Because while the rest of the world has been caught up in the noise of politics, pandemics, and power struggles, this group has been laser-focused on one goal: preparing everything needed for the rebuilding of the Third Temple. And when I say everything, I don't mean ideas or sketches or spiritual visions. I mean physical objects, measurable progress, tangible steps that bring prophecy off the pages of Scripture and into the real world. The Temple Institute isn't operating from the shadows. They're not a fringe sect or some obscure religious faction. They are well-funded, highly organized, and they operate right in the heart of Jerusalem with public access and international support. Their mission is crystal clear: Restore the divine service and rebuild the temple as it once was, based on the exact commandments found in the Torah. No reinterpretation, no compromise. Just literal, line-by-line obedience to what they believe is a biblical mandate. And they're not just building symbolic replicas. This isn't a museum of ancient artifacts. It's a production line for a sacred future. They've recreated more than 60 sacred items, each one crafted according to ancient specifications and rabbinical standards. The golden menorah? It's already built, constructed from over 45 kilograms of pure gold. The garments of the high priest? Woven, embroidered, complete with the breastplate containing 12 precious stones. The incense altar, the table of showbread, the silver trumpets, all completed, all waiting. But here's the kicker. This isn't about nostalgia. This is about functionality. These items aren't for display. They're intended for use, actual ritual use in a functioning temple. That's why every piece is built with ritual purity in mind. The materials are sourced to match biblical requirements. The craftsmen are trained in ancient techniques. Even the dye used for priestly garments comes from a rare sea snail, just like it did in the days of Moses. They're not playing around. This is precision. This is purpose. And it doesn't stop with objects. The Temple Institute has also established training programs for priests. That's right. They are identifying men from the priestly lineage, the descendants of Aaron, and preparing them to serve in the temple. These men are being taught how to perform the ancient sacrifices, how to purify themselves, how to follow the ritual calendar, and yes, they've already performed practice runs, actual rehearsals, full dress, full ceremony. The only thing missing is the building. And this leads to a chilling reality. If everything is ready, the tools, the clothes, the priests, the plans, then what exactly is stopping them? Because it's no longer a question of preparation. It's a question of timing. And timing, as history shows us, is everything. One political opportunity, one national crisis, one shift in public sentiment. That's all it would take. And then the third temple would rise. What's even more shocking is the level of cooperation the Temple Institute has managed to secure. They're not operating alone. There are alliances, legal, financial, and ideological, that stretch beyond Israel's borders. They've received support from wealthy Jewish donors in the United States, Christian Zionists who see the temple as part of biblical destiny, and even sympathetic figures within the Israeli government. These are not small-time players. These are individuals and groups with influence, with networks, with resources, and they're investing in one thing: the return of the temple. But ask yourself, why would so many people from different backgrounds unite around this one idea? Why funnel millions of dollars into building an ancient structure in one of the most volatile places on earth? Because they believe this temple isn't just a piece of history. It's the future. It's the fulfillment of a divine timeline. And whether they interpret that timeline through Jewish prophecy or Christian eschatology, the conclusion is the same. The temple must return. And here's the part that should make anyone paying attention pause. They believe it must happen in this generation, not the next, not centuries from now. Now. The Temple Institute has said openly that they believe we are living in the days leading up to the final redemption, that the temple must be ready at a moment's notice, that every year they delay could mean missing the divine window of opportunity. That's the urgency driving everything. That's why they aren't just talking, they're doing. But the world isn't ready. Politically, spiritually, emotionally, most people have no idea what this truly means. Because when the temple is rebuilt, it won't just be a religious event. It will be a global event, a geopolitical earthquake, and no one will be able to ignore it. Because the temple stands at the center of 3 major world religions, on land that has been contested for centuries. The Temple Mount is more than just dirt and stone. It's the most sensitive square meter on Earth. So what happens when the Temple Institute announces that the site is ready, that the materials are ready, that the priesthood is ready? You think there's going to be a smooth transition? You think the nations will applaud and welcome the restoration of biblical worship? Think again. This will spark outrage, resistance, possibly even war. And yet the movement continues, steadily, boldly, and without apology. And if you think this is just about Israel, think again. The implications stretch far beyond its borders. Because the moment that temple rises, every eye will turn to Jerusalem. Every prophecy teacher, every religious leader, every government with a stake in the Middle East, they will all have to respond. And the Temple Institute knows that, which is why they keep pushing, which is why they keep building. Because they're not just building a temple, they're building a moment, a prophetic moment, one that has been foretold for thousands of years. And the closer we get, the clearer it becomes. This isn't random. This isn't fanatical. This is deliberate. This is calculated. This is the countdown. And the next stage of this operation involves something most people have never considered: the funding, the money. The people behind the curtain who are financing what may become the most controversial project in modern history. That's what we're going to uncover next. And once you see who's involved, everything starts to make sense. Money doesn't just appear. It moves with intent. It follows belief, strategy, and above all, purpose. And when it comes to the reconstruction of the Third Temple, the money trail isn't just interesting, it's revealing. Because the real story behind this prophetic project isn't just about sacred architecture or spiritual preparation. It's about who's funding it, why they're doing it, and what they believe is coming next. When you follow the money, you find the motive. And in this case, the motive changes everything. The Temple Institute doesn't operate on prayers alone. It runs with millions in financial backing. And those funds are not coming from average synagogue donations or loose change from tourists visiting the old city. This is high-level funding, coordinated, sustained, and deliberate. We're talking about private donations from ultra-wealthy individuals who aren't giving because they think it's a nice cultural project. They're giving because they believe they are investing in the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. People with net worths in the hundreds of millions are writing checks because they are convinced, not hopeful, not curious, convinced that the temple must return in their lifetime. And these aren't just Israelis. In fact, many of the largest contributors come from outside Israel, especially from the United States. Orthodox Jewish business magnates, Christian Zionist leaders, and powerful political allies from evangelical circles have all played their part. They're not investing in symbols. They're investing in destiny. To them, this isn't philanthropy. It's obedience to Scripture. It's participation in a divine timeline they believe is unfolding right now, in real time. Some of the donations are discreet. You won't find them broadcasted on mainstream media or flaunted on public tax records. They move through private channels, often routed through charitable organizations that support biblical heritage or Jerusalem restoration efforts. But the end destination is clear. The funding ends up in the hands of those preparing for the Third Temple. And what they're building isn't for display, it's for activation. These donors are building the infrastructure of prophecy. The financial support doesn't stop at sacred items or training facilities. There are donors financing advanced research on how to carry out ancient sacrifices in modern legal frameworks. Others are contributing to real estate acquisitions in the area surrounding the Temple Mount. These are long-term plays, strategic moves to secure land, influence public policy, and quietly shift the environment toward acceptance of what most would consider unthinkable. Now ask yourself, why would a billionaire in New York care about a priest in Jerusalem sacrificing a red heifer? Why would corporate executives, high-ranking officials, and business tycoons funnel money into something that most of the world would call religious extremism? Because they see something you don't. They see the pattern. They read the texts. And they believe, deeply, that prophecy isn't symbolic poetry. It's a playbook, a roadmap, a timeline. And they are positioning themselves to be on the right side of it when it comes to life. They aren't funding tradition. They're backing a countdown. And here's where it gets even more complex. Some of these donors are Christians, but not just any Christians. Very specific groups within the evangelical world who believe the Third Temple is a necessary step for the second coming of Christ. That's why millions of dollars are being sent from churches and religious organizations in America to support a Jewish institution that will, by their own theology, set the stage for the rise of the Antichrist and the final conflict. That's how strong their conviction is. They believe it must happen, even if it means chaos comes first. Now imagine the tension this creates. Jews funding a temple for divine restoration, Christians supporting it for apocalyptic reasons. Both groups pouring resources into the same objective, driven by different endgame beliefs, and yet walking side by side, unknowingly or perhaps knowingly aligned in action. It's a strange alliance, but one that's gaining momentum, because belief, when tied to prophecy, overpowers logic, risk, and even fear. Meanwhile, governments stay silent. Mainstream institutions pretend it's not happening. But the money doesn't lie. The funding is real. The purchases are made. The craftsmen are paid. The priests are trained. And the donors, they're not stopping. If anything, they're increasing their efforts, because every year that passes, every global crisis that shakes the foundation of society, every war that touches Jerusalem, they see it all as confirmation that the time is near. And when they see signs, they give more. When a new archaeological find lines up with ancient scripture, the funding spikes. When tensions flare at the Temple Mount, the urgency intensifies. Their money moves with the prophetic timeline, and that timeline in their eyes is accelerating. This isn't just about wealth, it's about readiness. These donors don't just want to see the temple built, they want it ready to function the moment the opportunity comes. No hesitation, no delay. They believe when the moment arrives, politically, spiritually, or supernaturally, the temple must be fully prepared, and they are making sure it will be. But here's the sobering part. These efforts are happening without public debate, without international discussion, and without most people even knowing. And yet, they could trigger the most significant spiritual and geopolitical shift in modern history. That's the power of hidden funding. It shapes the future before the world even realizes what's happening. And that leads to a critical question. Who's really in control of this process? Is it the religious institutions, the financiers, the government officials quietly offering protection and legal coverage? Or is it something bigger, something orchestrated behind the scenes with a purpose none of us fully grasp yet? Because once you understand who's financing the return of the temple, you begin to see just how coordinated this movement is. It's not grassroots, it's top-down. And the next time you hear a whisper about the Temple Mount, know this: money has already spoken, plans have already been funded, and the pieces are already in motion. But what about the silence? Why isn't the media covering this? Why are these details so hard to find? That's what we're exposing next. Because silence isn't just ignorance. Sometimes it's strategic. And when the world's loudest platforms stay quiet about something this explosive, you need to start asking the right questions. There's a rule in modern information warfare that few people talk about. The most powerful weapon isn't censorship, it's silence. It's not about blocking access or deleting articles. It's about never letting the topic trend in the first place. And when it comes to the rebuilding of the Third Temple, the silence has been deafening. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a calculated absence. The global media, with all its power and endless reach, has collectively decided not to look in that direction. And that raises one unavoidable question. Why? We live in a world where the most trivial stories go viral in seconds. A celebrity's haircut, a politician's tweet, a street protest on the other side of the planet. They're all pushed to the forefront of your screen day after day. Yet a fully prepared plan to rebuild the most controversial religious structure in human history, on one of the most disputed pieces of land in existence, receives next to zero mainstream coverage. Not on television, not in headlines, not in breaking news alerts, just a strange, almost surgical silence. You'd expect at least some discussion, maybe a heated debate on global news panels, maybe a feature story tucked into the back of a weekend edition. But no, the silence isn't just passive, it feels intentional. Because the moment this story hits the public with full force, it disrupts too many agendas, it invites too many questions, and more importantly, it forces the world to deal with ancient realities that modern ideologies simply aren't built to handle. The global media ecosystem doesn't thrive on nuance or sacred tension. It thrives on control. Control over the narrative. Control over the questions people are allowed to ask. And the third temple doesn't fit into that framework. It's too old, too sacred, too dangerous, because it links directly to prophecy, conflict, and the end of the world as we know it. That kind of story can't be monetized like a political scandal or a celebrity meltdown. That kind of story shakes the very foundation of how people see the world, and no network executive wants to be responsible for opening that door. So they ignore it, they downplay it, or they bury it under piles of more relevant content. But the problem is, silence has a shelf life, because while the media stays quiet, the facts don't go away. They build, they multiply, they stack into a mountain of truth that eventually becomes too big to hide. And here's the part that really matters. This isn't just about oversight, it's about control of perception. If the media told the world that sacred artifacts were being rebuilt, that red heifers were being bred, that priests were being trained, and that blueprints had already been completed, people would panic. Debates would explode, governments would be forced to respond, riots could ignite overnight in Jerusalem, stock markets would react, religious tensions would erupt. The story wouldn't just trend, it would detonate. So instead, the gatekeepers maintain the illusion of stability by simply pretending it's not happening. They hope that by starving the story of oxygen, it will quietly fade. But prophecy doesn't work that way, and neither does truth. Because as the evidence piles up, as more people wake up, the silence itself becomes suspicious. It starts to look like what it really is, coordinated. But who's coordinating it? That's the uncomfortable question. There are people in high places, politicians, media executives, religious figures, who know exactly what's happening. They've seen the reports. Some of them have even funded parts of the plan. But they remain tight-lipped, playing their role in the silence. Because the moment one of them speaks out, it opens the floodgates. It forces the world to take sides, and taking sides in a story this big comes with a cost. Now that doesn't mean there's a shadowy room where global elites meet to discuss temple policy, but what it does mean is that there's a quiet, mutual understanding among powerful entities, an understanding that some stories are better left alone. Not because they aren't true, but because they're too true, too raw, too irreversible once exposed. And let's not forget, this isn't just about what's happening in Jerusalem. This is about the narrative being shaped globally. In classrooms, churches, universities, media platforms, and think tanks, the idea of the temple is either ignored or dismissed as irrelevant. Even in theological circles, the discussion has been softened, turned into metaphor, or written off as ancient fantasy. Why? Because the full weight of its reality is too disruptive. But here's the twist. That silence has become the loudest signal. When something of this scale is met with nothing but crickets, you know it's intentional. You know there's something there. And that awareness is growing. Independent voices, alternative media, underground journalists. They're starting to ask the right questions. They're pulling the curtain back piece by piece. And what they're finding is enough to rattle even the most hardened skeptic. Because silence doesn't mean absence. It means tension. It means a story is being suppressed, not because it's false, but because it's volatile. And when the truth is volatile, silence becomes its own kind of control. Not by denying facts, but by never letting them reach the surface. And that's why you haven't seen this on your evening news. That's why no one is talking about the millions being funneled into sacred infrastructure. That's why no one wants to touch the explosive reality that the temple might not just be a dream. It might be one decision away from becoming the most controversial construction project in modern history. But here's where the story breaks wide open. Because you can only hide fire for so long before the smoke starts to show. And now, that smoke is rising. The pieces are falling into place. The silence is cracking. And as we continue, we'll expose the key players who know what's coming. The ones shaping the future in the shadows. The ones whose silence isn't ignorance but strategy. Because when this temple rises, the entire world will be forced to respond. And no amount of silence will be enough to stop it. Power doesn't move in the open. It moves through back doors, back channels, and behind closed doors where the real conversations happen. And when it comes to the third temple, those conversations are already taking place. Not just in religious circles, but in diplomatic ones. Quietly, carefully, but deliberately. The idea that this is just a religious issue is an illusion. This is global. Because the moment the temple becomes more than a plan, the moment it's a declaration, world powers will be forced to respond. And some already have. Behind the silence, behind the media blackout, there are signals. Subtle, but unmistakable. Take the United States, for example. One of Israel's strongest allies, both politically and militarily. Over the years, U.S. administrations have consistently shown support for Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem wasn't just a symbolic act, it was a statement, a repositioning of influence, a redefining of territory. And those who understand the religious implications knew exactly what it meant. That wasn't just about real estate, that was about the Temple Mount. And while no president will openly say, "We support the rebuilding of the temple," the shift in posture tells you everything. Recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital opened the door to legitimizing deeper claims. Claims that include the Temple Mount and its prophetic significance. And those who are preparing the temple haven't missed that. They've watched every move, every speech, every photo op, and they see something the average observer doesn't. They see permission. Not explicitly given, but implicitly understood. A green light without the official language. But it's not just the United States. Other global entities are playing the long game too. The United Nations, for example, has issued resolution after resolution concerning Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, and religious sovereignty. But what's interesting isn't what the UN says, it's what they leave unsaid. They condemn disturbances, they call for peace. But they rarely touch the root issue. What happens if the temple is rebuilt? Because they know the question is radioactive. The moment it's asked publicly, it forces a diplomatic crisis. European powers have danced around this issue for decades. They promote dialogue, they encourage compromise. But beneath the surface, many of these nations have deep religious and historical ties to Jerusalem. And they know the moment the temple rises, their role shifts. Suddenly their silence becomes complicity or opposition. There is no neutral ground once the stones are stacked. Everyone must pick a side. And that's the looming threat, because right now global powers benefit from ambiguity. As long as the temple remains theoretical, no one is forced to take a stand. But the moment that changes, it reconfigures everything. Alliances, treaties, defense strategies. And this isn't theoretical. Military advisors in Israel have already conducted simulations of what would happen if construction began. The security ramifications are massive. The intelligence agencies are watching closely. They know this is a fuse. One spark and the fire spreads. Even more unsettling is the involvement of religious leaders within political structures. Certain senators, ministers, and ambassadors are openly sympathetic to the idea of the temple. They attend private briefings. They contribute to affiliated organizations. They work behind the scenes to ensure the project faces as little resistance as possible. Because for them, it's not just politics, it's prophecy. And prophecy to the committed outweighs policy every time. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. This isn't just about faith. This is about influence, about leverage, about who controls the narrative when the narrative is no longer avoidable. The temple is the ultimate disruptor. Once it becomes a reality, it forces every power player to recalibrate. Because no superpower can afford to look unprepared when the world's attention locks onto one sacred hill in Jerusalem. And here's the question that haunts those who are paying attention. Are the world's powers truly unaware of what's coming, or are they complicit in its arrival? Is the silence a sign of ignorance or strategy? Because the patterns suggest coordination. High-level figures making small but deliberate moves, meetings that aren't publicized, funding that's untraceable, influence that's exerted subtly but forcefully. What's coming isn't just a religious shift. It's a geopolitical earthquake. The temple isn't just sacred, it's strategic. Whoever influences it controls the narrative that follows. And in a world already fractured by ideology, that kind of control is priceless. That's why nations are watching closely, not because they're surprised, but because they're preparing. They're aligning. They're waiting for the first official announcement, the first sign of activity, the first piece of earth moved. And when that happens, their playbooks are ready. But most people won't see it coming. They'll be too distracted, too conditioned by years of silence, too unaware of what's been building underneath the surface. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Because when power shifts, it rarely gives a warning. It moves fast, decisively, and without hesitation. The temple will not rise in a vacuum. It will rise in the middle of a global power struggle. And it will force every nation, every institution, every leader to make a choice. Some are already preparing. Some are already involved. And the rest? They'll have no choice but to catch up when the dust starts to rise from the mount. And if you think this story has reached its peak, think again. Because what's already been prepared, in silence, in secret, is about to go public. And when it does, the world won't be the same. The next step in this journey takes us into prophecy itself. Not just what's been written, but what's already being fulfilled, and what's coming next. There's a reason the temple isn't just a building. It's a prophecy, a signal, a countdown marker that appears in every major apocalyptic narrative from Scripture. You can't talk about the end of days without it. The temple isn't just mentioned, it stands at the center of the final chapter. It is the stage where events unfold that shift not just religion or culture, but the entire structure of time as we know it. And right now, everything points to one chilling reality. The prophecy is no longer waiting to be fulfilled. It's already unfolding. In the book of Daniel, the prophet speaks of a covenant that will be confirmed for 7 years, a peace agreement involving many. Halfway through that agreement, the temple, already standing at that point, will be desecrated. The daily sacrifice will be stopped. An abomination will be set up in the most sacred space. For those who've read this before but never paid attention, it's time to reread it with your eyes open, because the groundwork for that prophecy is being laid brick by brick. The temple is being prepared, and the world is inching closer to the kind of political agreements that could make such a covenant possible. In the New Testament, Paul writes that the man of sin, the Antichrist, will exalt himself in the temple of God, proclaiming to be divine. That prophecy only works if there's a temple in existence. And if you're still thinking this is centuries away, ask yourself, what's missing? The blueprints? Done. The sacred items? Ready. The priesthood? Trained. The only piece missing is the moment. And once that moment arrives, whether through war, peace, or disaster, the temple will stand. And when it does, everything that has been predicted accelerates. Revelation speaks of a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, measuring its inner court but leaving out the outer because it is given to the Gentiles. That implies shared control, a split administration. And anyone who understands the current tensions on the Temple Mount knows that such an arrangement is not only possible, it's being discussed, quietly, behind closed doors. The idea of a joint religious zone has been floated more than once in diplomatic circles. And if the right crisis hits, or the right opportunity arises, such an arrangement could be implemented overnight. That would be the trigger. That would be the sign. This isn't speculation. It's sequence. The temple rises. A peace agreement is signed. Sacrifices begin. And then, in the middle of that prophetic timeline, something horrific happens. The temple is defiled. The worship is stopped. And the world enters a phase the Bible calls the Great Tribulation. 3.5 years of chaos. 3.5 years of deception. 3.5 years where the man who once brought peace reveals himself as the ultimate deceiver. And here's the part that most people miss. These prophecies are not written in symbolic, abstract language. They're exact, measured in days, in months, in years. This isn't vague, it's precise. And the temple is the clock. The moment it returns, the countdown begins. That's why this story matters. That's why it's dangerous. Because it strips away the luxury of disbelief. It forces even the skeptic to look at the evidence and say, something's happening here. And maybe that's the most unnerving part, how clear everything becomes once you see the temple not as a building, but as a prophetic key. A literal, physical anchor in the timeline of end-time events. Once it's standing, there's no going back, no hitting pause. The process begins, and it doesn't stop until it ends exactly as foretold, with the return of someone. but depending on what you believe, that someone is either a savior or a destroyer. What makes this moment even more intense is the way everything is aligning. For the first time in history since the destruction of the Second Temple, we now have the political environment, the technological capability, the religious drive, and the spiritual momentum to see it rebuilt. Not in theory, in reality. And that reality is supported by real money, real materials, real training, and real willpower. This isn't about if anymore. It's about when, and when might be much closer than anyone expected. For 2,000 years, the temple has existed as an idea, a longing, a symbol. But that era is over. It's no longer symbolic. It's strategic. It's active. And once construction begins, the world won't have the option to ignore it. The media blackout will collapse. The governments will be forced to react. Religions will have to confront doctrines they've tried to keep quiet for generations. And the general public? Most won't be ready. Because most haven't looked, haven't listened, haven't cared. But the clock doesn't wait for anyone. And when the temple returns, time will move faster than ever before. Political shifts will be lightning fast. Religious lines will be drawn. And those who've watched silently from the sidelines will find themselves pulled into the center whether they're ready or not. Because prophecy doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for consensus. It moves forward on schedule. And the temple, once rebuilt, marks the final phase. It tells the world that the prophetic timeline isn't a theory. It's a roadmap. And every piece is falling into place. So if you're still thinking this is just another historical curiosity or a religious debate with no real consequences, you need to take another look. Because the temple is more than a structure. It's the hinge point between the past and the future, between man's plans and God's design, between peace and war, truth and deception, judgment and redemption. And the moment it stands again, the world will be forced to choose which side of that divide it's on. And what happens next, the next major sign, is already in motion. It's already being tested. And it has already happened once, but barely anyone noticed. That's what we're uncovering in the next chapter. Because while the world was asleep, the altar wasn't just built, it was used. And what happened that day tells us more than most are ready to hear. It happened quietly. No breaking headlines, no international outrage, no massive crowds. Just a handful of people, at the edge of the world's most contested religious ground, doing something that hadn't been done in over 2,000 years. They assembled an altar. Not a model, not a museum piece, a functional altar, designed for actual use. And they used it. That event wasn't symbolic. It was a signal that what many still think is far off in the future is actually already in motion. The altar is ready. And more than that, it has already been tested in public, under supervision, in accordance with biblical standards. That's not theory, that's reality. And that changes everything. This happened in the year 2018. Most people missed it because they weren't looking. And those who were, the ones who actually saw it, they understood what it meant. Because once the altar is ready and active, the final piece of the prophetic puzzle is no longer in planning. It's positioned. It's alive. It's functional. Think about that for a second. The altar was always the core of temple worship. Without it, nothing could proceed. No sacrifice, no ritual, no fulfillment of the ancient ordinances that governed Israel's sacred relationship with God. And now, that altar exists, not in theory, not in renderings, but in full structure and operational form. But this isn't just about construction. This is about timing. The altar was built and used during Hanukkah in a move that was anything but accidental. The connection to the rededication of the Second Temple during the Maccabean period wasn't just historical, it was prophetic. It was meant to echo the past while calling forward the future, and the message was clear. The temple is no longer an idea, it's a process, and the process has already begun. The ceremony that took place included men dressed in priestly garments, trained in the ritual procedures of the Torah. The altar was prepared according to specifications laid out in ancient texts. Incense was offered, prayers were said, and yes, a sacrifice was simulated. Not a reenactment, a ritual, the first of its kind in modern Israel. And the world said nothing, not because it didn't matter, but because acknowledging it would require confronting what it truly means. Because when the altar is ready and tested, the timeline shifts. That altar represents more than just functionality. It represents permission, the belief that the time is now, that they no longer need to wait, that the moment for preparation is over, and the moment for action is here. That's the real reason why this event was both so small and so significant. Those behind it knew the world wasn't ready to understand, but they also knew they didn't need the world's understanding, only the go-ahead from the ones who matter most to them. And here's where the weight of it really lands. The altar doesn't get built unless someone believes it's going to be used. You don't pour resources, time, and risk into something just to let it collect dust. The people who built that altar aren't preparing for a someday. They're expecting a specific day, a day when access is granted, when tensions boil over, or treaties are signed, or catastrophes shift the world stage enough to make room for what they've waited generations to see. The temple standing again, and the altar burning daily. Let that sink in. This isn't about faith traditions anymore. This is about readiness. The altar is a physical declaration that says, we're ready. Now, not later. Not in the distant future. Now. And that reality puts pressure on everyone else. The governments, the religious authorities, the global institutions that have worked tirelessly to delay the inevitable. Because when the altar is ready, the excuses disappear, and so do the obstacles. The global silence surrounding the event wasn't just about control. It was about containment, containing a story that, once unleashed, would demand too many answers. Why was this allowed? Who approved it? Who funded it? What comes next? Those are questions no one in power wants to face, because the answers would reveal a truth that's been kept underground for decades. The temple is no longer just coming, it's on the verge of returning. And for those who've studied the ancient prophecies, the altar being tested is no small detail. It's a marker, a clear, unmistakable sign that the prophetic calendar has moved forward another step. Because before the final conflict, before the rise of the deceiver, before the chaos erupts, there must be an altar. There must be daily offerings. And now, with that altar prepared and proven, the stage is dangerously close to being complete. But even more than that, the altar sends a message not only to watchers of prophecy, but to those who would oppose it. It says, you've run out of time. The waiting period is over. The red lines are being crossed. And once the temple rises and that altar is placed on holy ground, nothing will be able to stop the chain reaction that follows. And if you're wondering where this leads, what the next move is after the altar has been tested, that answer is already in motion. Because the preparations don't stop there. There's one more piece that confirms this story is entering its final phase, and it has everything to do with something that's been missing for centuries. But now it has returned. Quietly, strategically, symbolically, and what it represents is so powerful, so theologically explosive, that even speaking about it sends waves across every major religious institution. That's what comes next. And it might be the final confirmation that the first act is ready to begin. Everything is ready. The tools have been crafted, the garments have been woven, the priests have been trained, the altar has been built and tested, the blueprints have been approved, the land has been measured, and even the symbolic ark, though not the original, has been completed and placed on standby. What we're looking at right now isn't a vague vision of the future. It's a fully staged reality, waiting on only one thing, the moment. And that moment is closer than most people dare to admit. The idea that we're just in the early stages of preparation is now outdated. We've passed that threshold. What was once theoretical is now practical. What was once spiritual is now political. And what was once a whisper among the devout has become an unspoken truth in the highest levels of global leadership. The temple is no longer a question of if, it's a question of when. And the when doesn't look like decades from now. It looks like one single trigger away. It might come through conflict, a military escalation in Jerusalem, one that forces a reshuffling of control over the Temple Mount. It might come through diplomacy, A sudden peace agreement that includes, buried deep within the clauses, a provision for religious coexistence. Or it could come from catastrophe, a global event so destabilizing that the world turns its eyes toward the holy city, desperate for meaning, for stability, for a sign. And when that moment strikes, the people behind this project won't hesitate, because they've been waiting, watching, preparing for decades. Every detail has been mapped out, every objection already anticipated. And this is what makes it all so urgent. When you understand that the stage is already set, the way you view world events changes completely. You begin to see that everything happening, the global unrest, the moral collapse, the rising tensions around Jerusalem, they're not isolated, they're converging, leading toward a singular point in history that has been prophesied for thousands of years. This is why the silence around the temple is not just suspicious, it's strategic. Because the moment the public becomes aware that everything is in place, the world must reckon with what comes next. The idea that this is just a religious ambition collapses. The prophetic becomes political. The spiritual becomes visible. The timeline becomes real. And that shift would change everything. The first act is not in rehearsal, it's in final setup. The curtains are closed, the audience unaware, but behind the scenes, every actor is in position. The props are in place. The scene is ready. All it takes now is for the director, history, prophecy, or divine timing to call for the lights to rise. And when they do, no one will be able to unsee what unfolds. This is not about pushing belief. This is about understanding what's happening, right now, beneath the surface. The temple is not an abstract topic for theologians to debate over coffee. It's a live issue with geopolitical weight. It's a fuse already lit. And the fact that it's still unknown to most people doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means those behind it have succeeded in staying one step ahead. But now that you know, now that you've seen the evidence, heard the facts, and followed the story from the shadows to the spotlight, the silence ends here. Because once this story spreads, once this reality begins to circulate beyond closed doors and into the mainstream, the countdown will no longer be hidden. It will be discussed, debated, and dissected, and eventually it will be fulfilled. Because every sign, every symbol, every move so far has followed a script written long before any of us were born. And if that script continues, if the next move comes as expected, we may witness in our lifetime the final fulfillment of the prophecy that started thousands of years ago. The temple once rebuilt won't just reshape Jerusalem, it will divide the world. Between those who believe and those who doubt. Between those who see and those who refuse. Between those who were ready and those who weren't. So if this video brought clarity, if it opened your eyes to something most have never considered, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Send it to someone who needs to see it. And if you want to make sure this message reaches more people, if you want to help break the silence, then hit the like button. Because the more engagement this video receives, the more it will be pushed by the algorithm. And this isn't just another video, this is a wake-up call. Because the stage is set, and the first act is about to begin.